Hello, YouTube friends. Welcome back to my channel and Happy New Year. I know it's been a while, but I took a little bit of a break and spent some time with the family during the holidays. It's been a year since I started this channel, and I really appreciate everyone who has supported and subscribed to my journey so far. My goal this year is to get better at bringing you great content and explore automation and AI together. And as always, I want to give you as much details as possible and teach you what I know in regards to coding and automation. So in today's video, I would like to show you how I built this Facebook group scraper and notifier using ZeroWork and n8n step by step from scratch. So it's been a while since I've done any web scraping tutorial, and I've always been interested in scraping Facebook group. So if you're not familiar with ZeroWork, ZeroWork is a low-code tool that allows you to build browser-based automations as an alternative to tools such as Playwright and Selenium. So if you're familiar with those tools, we will be using n8n, which is also a low-code tool that allows you to build API automation. By using ZeroWork and n8n, we're going to bridge the gap between these two tools and build a super powerful web scraper and notifier tool. I'm going to show you how I was able to scrape Facebook groups, messages, and use LLM to categorize it so it can inform me right away if there's any post that matches my interest. So this saves me a lot of time as I don't have to go to Facebook anymore, and all the posts will be saved for me automatically while I sleep. All right, so this should be a fun one. So if you're new here, my name is Dennis and I'm a software engineer and I make videos on coding, AI, and automation. So let's take a look at the diagram so you have a general sense of what we'll be building today. So let's do a quick look at that and let's hop on. All right, so let me walk you through my thought process when I'm starting this automation or web scraping. So we know that we're going to be using ZeroWork since we're doing a web scraping, and then we're also going to be using n8n. We can also use ActivePieces as well. So anything that can do some sort of API automation, we can use. We're also going to use some sort of email service to notify us if there's any post that matches our interests as far as categories. And we're going to be using LLM. I'm going to be using Straco here, although you can also use OpenRouter or OpenAI or whatever LLM that you want to use. And just to keep it simple, we're going to be using Google Sheets to store the actual posts. So this is what the Google Sheets is going to look like. So you can see here that I've been running this for a little bit just to make sure that everything is running smoothly and the posts are being gathered correctly. So you can see here that I have an ID, which is to help make sure that we're not inserting the same post over and over again. So it's just my way of making sure that each record is unique within the Google Sheets spreadsheet. The next thing is the poster, the person who posted that post, and then the main post, the raw text that they post. And then we're going to run it through LLM, which we have a clean post here, which gives us a bit more structured post and a bit more pretty in that regard. And then the date added is when we scraped it. So since we're not scraping the post when it was posted, we're just going to do a date added field. And then we're going to be running it through the LLM as well to help us classify that text, whether that belongs to either help or information or something else. I think I have it also as spam as well. So you can have different classification here and you can dictate whatever you want to get out of this. I'm just trying to keep this automation as generic as possible, but you can tailor it according to your needs. And I'm also saving the group name as well, so we can detect where that post originated from, right? So those are the main components that we're going to be storing in Google Sheets. So you can see here all the different fields that we're going to be storing. The ID is just to help us keep the record or row unique, so we're not inserting the same one. So we're just going to go do a comparison and filter. On the ZeroWork side, let's identify the fields that we're going to be capturing. So we're going to be creating two tables in ZeroWork. The first one is going to be for the groups. So I want to make it where I can run multiple groups and automate it. So I can have multiple groups. I'm going to be setting the group URLs in the group. The group is just for me so I can identify which URL that group belongs to. And then the main thing that we're going to be scraping on that page is going to be, we're going to have multiple rows of this, and we're going to have the poster and the post and the group. So we're going to be scraping those three things from the Facebook group, and then we're going to be sending it off to n8n. So let's take a look at the process here. How is it going to look like in ZeroWork? The lowest scheduled interval that ZeroWork offers is 5 minutes. So we're going to set it at 5 minutes. So this automation is going to run 5 minutes on our PC. and it's going to go to the groups that we have set inside of Zero Work. And then we're going to loop through each of those URLs, and we're going to be navigating to each of those group URLs. The next thing is we're going to be getting the latest post. So if we go back to the one of the groups here, we want to make sure that we change the order here. So we want to make sure that we always get the newer post. So we can change this by going to this sort, and by changing the default, it's going to be most relevant. So it's going to be just random. It's based on what it feels like is relevant to us. So we want to control this by actually giving us the new post, and it's going to be on the top. So as you can see that URL here, change the sort setting to chronological order. That's going to be the first thing that we need to do. So every time we go to a group and save the URL, we want to make sure that we've set the sort setting here to chronological, so that we always see the post regardless of when it was posted. So we're always going to get the new one. So that's going to be the first thing. And then I'm going to take you through the step-by-step process of using Zero Work if you're not familiar with Zero Work at all. But we're going to get the latest post with the text, and we're going to iterate to each post. I actually changed this. So we're going to do all the web scraping first. So we're going to go through all the groups and then do a scraping for all the contents. And then once we've gathered all the posts and posters, we're going to send to NNN using an HTTP request. And that's when we can check if the post has already been recorded in Google Sheets, if it's unique or not. If it's already there, then we're not going to do anything. Otherwise, we're going to go and continue and send it to LLM to classify the post, which we're going to be using Straco for it. There's going to be a couple of things that we're going to be doing. So we're going to be categorizing the post. What type of category is it? Whether it's help or announcement, or if it's spam, whatever we want to classify the post. And then we're going to be using LLM to clean the post as well and make it structure sense. We're also going to be sending ourselves an email just to show you guys how it looks like. So this is my inbox with all the emails we have. So we have the name of the group on the first part of the subject, and then we have the subject of that post. And then you have the structure here where the poster will be on the first line, and then the main question, and then some examples here. So you can go through this. It's a bit more cleaner. So that's the poster and then main question. You get a gist of really what the question is about without being cluttered in a raw format. So since we're going to be sending ourselves an email as well. So let's go back into the diagram here. So if it matches a category, then send us an email. You can send yourself a text. You can send yourself whatever you need to notify yourself of there's anything that really matches your category. All right, so that's what we're going to be working on today. I'm going to be showing you a lot of things. We're going to be setting up everything from Zero Work, and then we're going to move on into then where we're going to be setting up the API automation to connect to Google Sheets. So that's going to be what we're going to be building. So before we build this automation, let's walk you through how everything connects in terms of Zero Work and NNN, so you can have a general idea of how everything flows from one tool to the next. So the first thing is it's going to start from Zero Work, where we're going to be storing the temporary tables and all the posts that we're going to be scraping inside of Facebook. So it's going to start off by, we're going to clear the temp table, and then we're going to be using it as some sort of index just to help us keep track of where we at as far as where we need to insert the records. So we're going to go through all the different Facebook groups that we have. So we're going to be setting the URLs, and we're going to open each link, right? And then we're also going to be using a couple of codes here. So I'm going to be showing you guys the approach that I took in terms of coming up with a solution. So I went with a coding approach where I basically separated this code to scroll to the bottom. So basically you saw earlier where we scroll to the bottom of the page in order to get us more posts, so we can see more posts and scrape more data. The next code node that we have here is the actual scraping of the Facebook group. So we go through each of the elements within that page, and then we're storing it inside of a temp table. And then after we've gone through all the different posts and different groups, we're going to loop through all the temp tables. We're going to set up another loop after we finish scraping the data. Then we're going to go through and send individual posts to NNN, and we're going to be sending the Facebook data. So it's going to go here, and it's going to go in the next diagram here, which goes to the NNN webhook. So we're going to be using a webhook inside of NNN, and we're going to be listening for data that's going to be coming in. The webhook here is set up, and that's going to kick off this whole automation on the NNN side. And then we're going to be using the ID. So we're going to doing a substring, the first 20 characters. So that should be unique enough to help us keep all the posts within Google Sheets unique. So we're going to take the first 20 characters of a post and we're going to be doing a filter. We're going to help determine if that post has been added to Google Sheets or not. So if there's this already post that exists, we're not going to do anything. Otherwise, we're going to continue and we're going to be preparing the message. And then you see here that it's have 3 blocks or 3 nodes, which is going to be pointing to a subflow inside of NNN. So this is going to be for the LLM part. I set this up because Strayco doesn't have a native integration inside of NNN just yet. So I've set up a simple subflow here where we can reuse the HTTP call to Strayco over and over again. And then we're going to be calling this multiple times. So we're going to be using this to classify our Facebook post, whether it's a help or announcement or if it's a spam. So that's what we're going to be using today. So although you can have your own type of category, whatever you want to use when categorizing the Facebook post. So the next thing is we're going to run through and we're going to prepare a cleanup message where we're going to be cleaning up the actual post. So when we get an email, we get notified, it's a bit more structured as opposed to just like a raw text that the poster posted in the Facebook group. And then the next thing is we're going to be using the same subflow to summarize the post. So this is going to be used for the subject line. So we don't have to actually view the message or the email in order to have a gist of what the message is about. So we're going to be doing a summary here in which we're going to be using for the subject line of the email message. And then we're going to be setting up the Google Sheets fields, which we're going to be adding to Google Sheets. At this point, we're just going to be storing the Google Sheets data, the ID, the post, the poster, and the cleanup message and all that. And then lastly here, we're going to be doing a switch, which we're going to be determining if that post classifies as a specific one that we're looking for. So in my case, send me an email if it's like some sort of a help type of post. So we're going to be using Email It here, which is a email service, although you can also use Gmail or any type of email service provider to send yourself an email. I figured I'll use something different. I had Email It for a while. It's very similar to SendGrid, where you can send an email using their API and then it will just send you an email that way. So that's what we're going to be building today. I hope that you are excited. So I'm going to take you through the whole step-by-step process and how I was able to do this whole automation. Let's quickly walk through the demo real quick so you can see that everything is working as expected. So you can see here that I'm getting an email notification with the subject, which is a summary of what the Facebook post is about, and also the poster and also the question that's been posted. And it's being sent to my email address. And I've been running this for a full day. You can see here that I have a Google Sheet with the different columns that we're going to be web scraping for today, including the poster, the post, and then we're going to be running it through the LLM, where we're going to be cleaning up the post, making sure that the post is clean, and also we're going to be classifying it. And if we classify it as something like of a help, then we're going to get a notification. And we're also including the group as well, so we can determine from the just row that this is coming from whichever post or whichever group it is coming from. So you can see here that I've been running it for a while now, for a full day. So this is what it looks like. Including the clean post looks like this, where you're going to see the poster in the main question. This is the same one that we get out of our email once we get the email, right? So I'm going to clear this so you can see that we're actually running and doing something here. So I'm going to clear all the rows and I'm going to go back to Zero Work, and I'm back in my flow here in Zero Work. I'm going to hit run. And I'm going to drag my screen here, which is going to pull up the first group that I have listed in Zero Work to be scraped. So the first one is make.com, and it's going to go through the posts, and it's going to scroll down to the bottom. Right now, it's going to perform the scraping on this page, and then I'm going to move it to the left-hand side so you can see. And momentarily, you're going to see the post come in here, and Google Sheet is going to be added, and we're just going to have to wait till all the web scraping has occurred. Since that's going to take a little bit of time, I added a little bit of delay between each group to make sure that the web scraping doesn't fumble or it grabs the data before closing down. So let's pause the video and I'm going to show you guys as the post comes in here. So after a few minutes, you can see here that the posts are starting to come in, And if I go back to my inbox, you can see that their new email has also come through as well, since this post has been classified as help and the post has been coming in here. So the process is it's going to scrape all the different Facebook groups, and it's going to scroll it down, and then it's going to scrape the post and the poster. And then once that's completed for all the groups, it's going to make a request to NNN where it's going to interact via the webhook. And that's where the posting and the LLM interaction begins. And also that's where the email is also going to be sent, which is from NNN. So yeah, hopefully that helps you see what's happening here. And it's very simple demonstration of what you can do with Zero Work NNN. So let's tackle the first part of the automation, which is to web scrape this using Zero Work. Just do a quick recap of what we're trying to accomplish today. So for Google Sheet, we're going to be capturing the ID, which we're going to be using for determining whether that post has been added to Google Sheets or not. So it's going to be our unique identifier. The next one is going to be the poster and the post, which we're going to be web scraping from the group, including the name of the group. The clean post and the classification is what we're going to be, that's going to be the output from the LLM. Once we run that post in LLM to classify it between help, announcement, or spam, and in different categories, and date added just to make sure that we know when that post has been added. And then on the Zero Work side, when we scrape the post, we're going to be storing the group URL and the group. And we're going to loop through all these groups, and then we're going to go to all the different groups, and we're going to be scraping them. So if you have many groups that you're interested in web scraping, this is an opportunity to add as many as you want. And then it's just going to go ahead and scrape all the groups. Just add a little bit more flexibility to this automation. The next is the main post. We're going to be storing it into this Facebook group post fields, where we're going to be scraping the poster and the post, including the group. So this is going to be some temporary fields that's going to be in Zero Work before we pass it on to NNN. So in Zero Work, we're going to be scraping these three things, and then we're going to be passing it to NNN via a webhook. And then we're going to be storing these columns inside of Google Sheets via NNN. So going back into the Zero Work flow, here you can see the whole flow from beginning to end. I have a deactivated flow on the top to see what's happening here. Since I'm using a lot of code to do the web scraping, just to give you an idea of what's happening is we're going to go through each post. We're going to go through, start repeating to the different elements, and we're going to be saving the poster name. And if you go back to the group, you notice here that some groups have a see more, where you have to click on the see more just to see all the different texts. So if we're going to have to look for the events where the see more is available on the screen, where we need to take actions to see the full post. So once you click on see more, you're going to see all the full text of that post. So we're going to have to anticipate that it's going to be there for some of the posts. So that's why we need to look to check the post if there's more, and if it was found, then we're just going to click on the element before we save the actual text. So that's what we're going to be doing today. All right, so let's start from scratch. So I have a blank taskbot here in Zero Work. Let's start with setting up the variables and also the tables. So you have to go and click on the left-hand side, and then we're going to click on the variables, and we're going to create a new variable here. We're going to name this variable index. And then we're going to be setting the default to 0 and going to be save this. So we're going to be using this index. Since we have to go through and use the code, we need a way to keep track of the records where we need to insert it within a table. So it's going to be more clear later on as we go through this demonstration. But we're going to have to set up the tables. We're going to add a new table. And then from the drop down for the table type, we're going to be choosing create a table from Zero Work, and then with custom columns. And then we're going to name this Facebook groups, group URL, and then another column, and it's going to be the group name. So we're going to be keeping track of the group URL and group. The group URL is what we're going to be using to navigate to that page. So let's add this table. Let's populate the group first before we move on to the table. So I have a couple of groups that I want to add here. So going back into the group via this URL, so you can see here that there's a sorting setting equals to chronological order. So if you scroll up to the top, by default, it's going to be the most relevant. So which we don't want, we want to get the most recent one. So we're always getting the newest post on the very top, which is what we want to do. So instead of most relevant, we want to switch the sorting order to new post, which will give you this query string where it's going to give you the sorting underscore setting equals chronological. So this is the URL that you want to add in your table. So what we're going to do here is when I add a new row, and we're going to be populating the URL, and then we're going to be setting up the name of the group. This is to help us identify what this group is about. I'm going to add another one. I'm going to add a new row. I'm going to add the NNN group, which is, you can see, let's load that page. And I'm just going to grab the name of that group, and I'm going to put it next to the group name. All right, so once the group has been established, we're not going to touch that group unless we need to add or remove groups from that list, since that's what we're going to be using to do the web scraping. So that's going to be static data. The next one is going to be the dynamic data. This is going to be holding the post, right, as we go through the different groups. So we're going to create a new table. I'm going to call this Facebook group post, and I'm going to add 3 columns. I'm going to add the poster, the post, and also the name of the group, right? So the reason why I'm adding the group here as well is because we don't have to worry about having to hop on a different table just to see everything. So we're just going to scrape everything from the page, and then we can easily just pass it on to NNN via the webhook API HTTP request. So let's add the table. All right. And then for this one, that's going to be it. Let's start and build this automation, right? So I'm going to name this to Facebook Group Scraper. And then to start off with, we're going to start by resetting the tables, right? Or the variables and the group posts. Let's go to the right-hand side where we're going to be looking to delete the data. So let's do that first. And we're going to go and delete all the rows from the group posts. And then we're going to reset group post. So make sure we start from a blank slate, and every single time we run this automation. And let's hit save. All right, the next thing we need to do here is we need to update the data. We need to reset the index to 0. So this is our marker. This is what we're going to be using to figure out the rows where we need to insert the next data. So we need to make sure that we reset the variable index. That's actually, we're going to set it to 0. That's the value of what we're going to be setting it for. And then the variable is going to be for the index. And then we're going to go call it reset index to 0. And we're going to connect these two. Now we're ready to start scraping the page. I have some notes here on the selector. I'm not going to do a selector on this video, as that will take a little bit of time. It took me a little bit of time just to make sure that the selector that I picked for this scraper is not going to break anytime Facebook release a new version of their Facebook page. So I just want to make sure that it's something that's going to stand the test of time. So let's inspect this page. So you can right click and inspect on the page, or you can also hit F12 to bring up the developer console. As you can see here, I can grab the selector for the post block. Once I determine the blocks or the containers that I want to scrape, you can see that if I do a Control F on this, it was able to select the first block of the group. And as I go through this, if I go to the next one, it's going to highlight the next post block, which contains the name of the person who posted it, and then also the post, including the comments. So that's what we want here, is we want to capture individual blocks. And I've picked a selector here, which basically it doesn't have a class. I have to pick something that has attributes in it. So you can also pick feed as well. You have to make sure that it's something that's reliable. That's not going to change. You can see that the classes that they picked for this page, it looks funky and it's very suspicious. You see that it's most likely going to change on the next run. Something during the deployment process is probably creating these classes on the fly, and it's just randomly assigning it to these classes, and then they're assigning the styles that way. But anyways, we have to pick something that's very reliable here as far as selectors. And I have picked the containers here for each individual containers. And then from each container, we can find the actual name of the post or the poster. So as far as the poster, I've picked this selector. And if I go back into the page, you can see here, I go back to the first one, it's going to highlight the poster. And if I go to the next one, it's going to highlight the next person, right? Same thing with this attribute. This will select the actual message, right? So if I go highlight this one, it's going to highlight the first one, and then going and highlighting over that, it's going to go and highlight the actual post. So those are the things that we need to look out for, which is why I've chosen these selectors. So let's go back into Azure Work now and let's set it up. So let's go through the process of going through each group first, right? So I'm going to add a start repeat here. There you go. So I'm going to drag it on the screen. For this one, we're going to make it dynamic since we're working against the table. So we're going to pick the groups here. And then if you want to limit how many groups you want to run it by, you can specify the limit here. Otherwise, it's going to go through all the groups. So we're just going to put 1 for now for testing purposes. So just keep the testing minimal. So let's hit save. And then we're going to attach it to the next one from the previous node. And we're going to name this through the group. All right, so the next one is we need to navigate to each of these URLs, right? So let's go to the top and open the link. And then for this one, so we're inside the group for each individual groups at this point, since we're inside the loop. Let's go ahead and attach it first. We're gonna go into this loop, and then we're gonna need to reference the groups, right? And then we're gonna add a delay here. So after open up the page, we're gonna have to make sure that there's a delay just to make sure that the page properly loads with everything on that page has been loaded, right? So and we name this open link. Actually, let's keep it as it is. So that's gonna be it. The next one is we're gonna be scrolling down to the bottom, right? So in order for us to see more page, so when you actually load this page for the first time, you're only gonna see 1 or 2 posts loaded, maybe just 1. So in order to see more, you can see that scroll bar doesn't have that much size into it, so we're gonna have to go and scroll down to the bottom. In order to do that, there's a few ways. You can tap the spacebar a few times, or you can just do programmatically where we can scroll to the bottom. So I'm going to show you a few things that you can do. So for this one, you can do a keyboard action where you can hit space a few times, 3 times, just to scroll down to the bottom. That's not the path I want to take here. I'd rather do it in the code. So I'm going to write a JavaScript code here, and we're going to go and scroll to the bottom. I'm going to call it scroll to the bottom. For this one, I'm going to paste a code, and I'm going to go through what it's doing. So I declared a function called scroll to bottom, and it just does this window.scroll to. It's just going to determine the height from the top, and it's going to have this smooth behavior. And then I'm going to just call this a few times. So 1, and then it's going to set like a 1 second delay, and then call the next one. And then the 1 second delay, it's going to call the same. So that gives you that scrolling action on the page. We're going to rename this to scroll to bottom. So we're just calling it a few times. And let's attach it to the next from the previous node here. And the next thing that we need to do is the actual web scraping. So I've shown you earlier that I had a deactivated flow where it goes through that process. Actually, web scraping, the Facebook group was a little bit of challenge that I anticipated. So we're going to do the JavaScript code once again. So let's go to the bottom, and I'm going to drag the JavaScript. I'm going to paste a bunch of code here, but I'm going to go through it step by step. I have this format where I declare the function usually, and then I'm going to call it at the bottom like this. I'm doing an await on it. And then I'm also declaring my reference ID on the top, just in case I need to update the reference ID. I don't have to go through all the code just to change the reference ID, right? So the first thing I need to do here is I need to change the reference ID to point to the correct one. This is from my previous code. Let's rename this and call this scrape page. And I'm going to save this. So I'm going to get the reference ID for the post, which we're going to be using to insert to. So for this one, I'm going to copy the reference ID next to the group post, and I'm going to go back into that JavaScript code, and I'm going to go and replace the ID here. And the next thing that I wanted to do is I want to copy the reference ID for the variables. So I'm going to go here and open up the variables, and you can see the ID is, so let's copy that, and let's go and go back here. So I'm going to replace the reference ID here. So I have the reference ID for the table, and also I have the reference ID for the index. The index is what we're going to be using to basically keep track of the index where we need to insert the record next inside of this group post table, right? So which I also have a reference ID. The first thing that we do here is we declare the variables. This is our special code specific to Zero Work. So the way we do that is we need to do a get reference. I declared a couple of constants, which will reference the index variable and the tables here. And so I'm doing a get ref, and then I'm passing in the ref ID for those references. And I'm getting the index name and also the table. The first thing I do is I do a let. Since the index is stored or the variables are stored as string, we need to convert it to number first so we can increment it. The next thing here is to actually get the individual blocks of posts, right? So we're going to do a query selector all, which will turn it into an array of elements. So we're going to get into rows, and then that's where we're setting it. And then before we go to the actual rows, which is the group post, we're going to grab the group name. So there's only this selector, which if you go back into the page and do a Control F, it's going to give you the actual group name. So we're going to be scraping that group name first, and then we're going to be storing it into a variable. So let's go back into here. And then the way you do that is you can call this text content, which grabs the content of that element, and then we can pass it and set it to this variable. So once the group name has been set, let's go through the entire row. So we're going to do a loop here for rows of rows. So the first thing is within that row, right? Within that block of content, we're going to reference the poster first. So we're only looking for elements within that row. So we're not looking for anywhere. That's why the selector here is very minimal. We're only looking for the H2, right? So the poster lives within this H2. So that's how we determine the element for the poster. And then we can create a new variable here for the text content, which we now can set here. The next thing that we need to do here is to check for see more elements. So remember earlier, there's going to be times when the see more button is going to be there. And if you start grabbing the text right away, you're not going to see the entire post. So we need to expand that post by clicking on see more, and that's what will allow us to see the entire post. So we're going to look for the see more button. So the way we do that is to look for this role equals to button of a div, and then if we find it, we're going to click on it and do a delay before we do further action, right? So we want to make sure that it expands first before we take action, just to make sure there's no lag. It's going to make a asynchronous request maybe somewhere, and that the text is not going to be available until that text comes back from the server. So that's why we're adding a delay here. And then once we have clicked on that element, if it does exist, we're going to grab the post through this selector, which I've shown you guys earlier. Once we get the post, we're going to save the text content on this variable, post text content. And we're going to be checking if the post and poster exists. So just to make sure that we're doing some defensive programming here, where both of those elements exist before we actually save it into the table. So if the poster and the post doesn't exist, we're not going to do anything, right? We're just going to skip that entire post. So this is just for defensive programming. It's most likely not going to happen, but just want to make sure it's there. And then the way we set the table is using setRef, and we're also using the same function to set the reference for the index. So the way we do that is we're doing an await setRef, and then we pass in the table reference ID and the name, the column as the name, and then the value would be the individual value. So for the poster, we're passing in the post text content, and then the index is the pend index, right? So wherever we are, so if it starts with 0, which is the starting point, it's going to start adding that row on the first index, on the first one. So since it's in index based, 0 is going to be the first one, and then 1, and then 2, and 3, and so forth. And that's just going to increment over time, so it knows when to put the next record, right? And then the post, same idea here. We're just going to replace any double quotes into a single quotes here. And then for the group, we're just going to grab the group text content. And I'm just doing a little bit of logging here. So these functions are 0 work specific, and then I'm just incrementing the index here. So it's go through each of those, and it's only incrementing it if we're actually inserting the record, right? So we don't want to increment the index if we're not inserting a record into the table. And then lastly, outside of that loop, so we have the for loop, and then after the for loop has completed, we're going to set the reference for the index to flush it back into the variable index. And then we're going to convert it to string, since the variable accepts a string. So that's going to be that for the code. I'm going to change the naming here. So we're going to close this off by connecting it to the previous node. So after the loop has completed, once the scraping has completed, let's run this just to make sure that everything is working. I'm going to hit run. And it's doing some checking here, make sure that there's no syntax error, or make sure that all the fields has properly been All right, we actually encountered an error here, which I was expecting. So the first thing that we need to do here is we need to set up the authentication. So we need to make sure that we are logged in into Facebook before we run this automation. So we want to make sure that we are on that tab for Facebook, and we're going to export the cookies for that site. So instead of having to worry about having to be logged in, or having to enter a password and username and then navigating to the individual groups, we're just going to export the cookies using the edit this cookie. There's like a bunch of Chrome extensions out there that's available where it will allow you to export the JSON string. But let's go ahead and export it. So we're going to go and click on the export, and let's go back into Zero Work. So I'm going to go back here, and then on the top right, we can go to the task bot settings, and inside of this cookie, we're going to paste the cookie, which looks like this. So it's a JSON array, which includes the domain and expiration date for that cookie, and it will make sure that we are logged in into Facebook before we run this. So let's close this out, run this again. So it's going to open up the page like so. And it's going to scroll down to the bottom, and it's going to close this out. So if we open up the Facebook group post table, we can see here that since we're only set it to one group to run, it was able to just scrape for that one group. You can see here the post and the group, and also the name of the poster. You can see the announcement made by Diana, and then there's also a few posts, which includes the full post for that page, right? So we know that it's working. So every time we run this, it's going to clear that table when we first run the automation. The next thing that we need to do is we need to do after repeat. So we do the web scraping first, and then after that, we're going to do an after repeat to perform additional actions. Right, so let's open up after repeat, and we'll drag it to the screen. This is just going to indicate that we want to perform additional actions after the repeat has occurred, right? So let's connect this here. And then the next thing that we need to do is we need to loop through that temp table, right? We need to go through all the posts in this temporary table so that we can send it to NNN. So let's add a repeat. We're going to do a star repeat. And then for this one, we're going to do a dynamic since we want to go through the group post. And then we're just going to go and just process all of them, right? So let's close that. And then let's connect this here, loop through the post. So the next part is we need to send those individual posts to NNN. So it's going to process it individually. So let's add an HTTP here. And we're going to do a send HTTP request, and then send post to NNN. And then for the method, we're going to be choosing post here to allow us to pass the JSON body as part of the request. So for the URL, this is going to be the URL for the webhook inside of NNN, but let's just create the body for now. So this is what we're going to be sending to NNN. We're going to be sending the post, and then we're going to be sending the poster. And then I'm just going to just mock this for now. But this is what it's going to look like. So we're going to be sending also the group, right? As part of this, we're going to be, for each individual post, we're going to be sending out the post, which we can reference the group post with the post. So it's going to include this variable. So the reference ID and the name of the post. And then let's go and include the poster. And we can do that by referencing the group post and then the columns of poster. Same thing with the group. So let's do a reference for the group, and that's going to be it for the group, right? So we're going to indicate a post so that we can send a JSON body. Let's hop on to NNN real quick and create the webhook. So I have a brand new flow here in NNN. So let's do add a trigger here, and I'm going to go look for a webhook as a trigger, and then it's going to give us a test URL. So once we've finished testing this, we're going to switch to production URL, but for testing purposes, we're going to switch to the test URL. And we can listen for events. So I'm going to copy the URL for that webhook, and I'm going to go and switch to Postman. So I'm going to create a brand new request, and I'm going to switch to post, and I can mock our data that we're going to be sent to NNN. So I'm going to copy the payload and switch to Postman, and switch to body, and then to raw. I'm going to copy the JSON and just copy one of the sample requests, something that's just copy this one just for testing purposes. So that's going to be the post. Make sure we don't have any line breaks. And then for the poster, let's copy the poster. And then for the group, we're also going to be sending over the group name. And then we can just hit send. Actually, let's switch this to post and do a listen for event here again. Hit send. Okay, workflow has started. If you go back to NNN, as you can see, the body has come through. You can see the post and the poster and the group inside of the body of the webhook request. So let's switch to NNN and finish off the demonstration and the automation inside of NNN. So once we have established that we're able to connect to NNN and able to send a post request and we're able to send the post and group, we can switch to production URL and copy the URL. We're going to copy the new webhook URL from production, and we're going to go back into Zero Work and paste it in the URL. So this is going to be the one that we're going to be using inside of Zero Work to make this post to NNN. Let's save this, and then we're going to wrap it up by connecting it to the previous node. So that's pretty much what the completed Zero Work taskbot looks like. So now we can jump back into to finish off the automation. So before we do that, we actually have to make sure that we create a new spreadsheet inside of a Google Sheet. And we're going to need a few columns here. So the first one is going to be the ID, which is going to help us identify and make each post unique before we insert it into the Google spreadsheet. So we're going to be using the first 20 characters of the post, and that's what we're going to be using to make sure that we're not inserting the same post over and over again inside of Google Sheet. The next one is we're going to be grabbing the poster and the post, which we're going to be sending from Zero Work. The clean post and the classification is our two things that we're going to be running through LLM. We're going to be using the Straightcoast API, and specifically we're going to be using DeepSeek V3 to clean up the posts, make sure that we get the poster and the main question very clean before we send ourselves an email notification. So more on that in a little bit, but the classification is we're going to be using LLM as well to help us classify that post, make sure that we categorize it, and we're only going to get notified for anything that has a help category. So we're going to be using the information, help, and some other category as well to make sure that we can classify that post. And then we're also going to be including the group name. So we need all these columns, make sure we have this correctly here. So we have the ID, poster, post, clean post, date added when it was scraped, and then classification and the group. All right, so let's switch back to NNN. So this is what we're going to be building on this next segment of the video. So we're going to be building this whole automation workflow where we're going to be accepting the data from Zero Work, and we're going to be processing it, and then we're going to insert it into the Google Sheet, and then we're going to be sending ourselves a notification if it meets our criteria. So let's get started with the process. So I already have the data here in my webhook. I'm going to pin the data so I can reuse that same data over and over again. The next thing that I want to do here is I want to add a Google Sheet node, and we want to query and make sure that our post is unique and that doesn't exist in Google Sheet yet. So we're going to go and get row in Sheets, and we're going to go and connect to my Google Sheet account. So if you don't know how to connect to your Google Sheet, you need to create a new credential, and you have to go to your Google console in order to set this up, and you need to create a new credential, and you need to paste this callback URL to it. I've done the setup process in my previous video, so you can watch those ones, but after you created a new credential, you're going to get the client ID and client secret, and then you're going to be pasting it both, and that should allow you to authenticate via OAuth to Google's API. So once you do that, you're going to hit save. Since I already have the credentials, I'm going to pick that, and I'm going to sheet within the document, get rows, and then from the list, I'm going to pick the Facebook group post. That's going to be the sheet that I'm interested in, and then we're going to be using the sheet one since we only have one. The next thing that we need to do here is we need to do a filter. So we need to grab specific sheets or rows that meets the criteria. So we're going to go and add a filter. So we're going to be picking the ID here. So if you go back to Google Sheet, it was able to identify the different columns that I have available here in my worksheet. So we're going to be using the ID. And then for the value, we're going to go and switch to expression. And we're going to go and grab the post. We're going to drag it to the value area. And we're going to go and do a substring here. And we're going to be taking the first 20 characters of the post, and we're going to go and convert it to lowercase. lowercase, just to make sure that we don't have to worry about dealing with capitalization or casing issue. So we're going to test this. So you can see here that this post already exists, but if I do and change this to something else where, let's say I just put like some random characters, it's not gonna find anything, right? The main thing here that we want to do also is we want to change the always output data to toggle that to on, just to make sure we are always outputting something. So if we do end up not finding anything, it's not going to give you us anything. Therefore, it's going to stop the execution of the automation. So when you do a test step now, we're going to get some output, right? So if you go back to JSON, we're always going to get something regardless if we're not able to retrieve a record or not. So in this case, we're able to retrieve a blank record, right? So if I switch this back to the previous value and do a test step, we're going to get one record, right? So that's what we need to do in determine next if something exists in a database. So we're going to pin this for now, and we're going to call it get post by ID, and then we're going to go and rename it, right? Make sure I got my naming correctly, and then we're going to finish that. And then the next step is we're going to add an if node. So this is where we're going to be determining if the post exists or not. If it doesn't exist, we're going to insert the record and continue on with the automation. Otherwise, it's just going to terminate it. So, right, so the next thing that we need to do here, we need to go look up the previous node. The way to do that is we're going to switch to expression, and we're going to do a $JSON to look at the previous node, and we're going to go and look at the values. So the value is going to give us an array. And then since it's an array, we're going to check if it's empty, right? So we're going to change the name of this to check if the post exists. So we're going to run this. All right, it falls in the false branch, which means that the post already exists, which means that we're not going to do anything. So we're just going to add a no operation, do nothing here, since we're not doing anything. So let's make it go up into the true side of the condition by go back to this one, and let's change this one again into something, and we're going to run it once again. And then once we run this, it's going to go up in the true side of the branch, right? So I can revert this back into the old value, and then we can go and do that. So now we are on the true side of the branch. We're going to proceed. The next step is we're going to be reaching out to an LLM provider. So you can use OpenRouter, OpenAI, or whatever type of provider you want to use. We just want to make sure we have a LLM that we're going to be using for classifying the post, whether it's a help or information. So the tool that we're going to be using today is we're going to be using Straiko's API. Since Straiko doesn't have a native integration with n8n just yet, so we're going to be using their API to connect into, and then we're going to be using DeepSeek v3. So I'm going to be showing you guys how to do that. So we're going to be creating a subflow that we can call from the main flow. The subflow will allow us to reuse the subflow over and over again. And we're just going to be passing in the message, and then we're going to get back a response from that. So we're going to set this up for now, but I have their API pulled up. So you can see here, if you go to the model, you can retrieve the models that they have available. And then specifically, we're going to be using the prompt completion v1, which will allow us to specify the models and also the message. There's some other parameters that you can also provide, the file URLs if you're doing RAG, but we're not going to be using those today. But we're only interested in passing one model, which is the DeepSeek v3. So let's go to my Postman here real quick and go to the models and have it set up. I have my authentication already set up. If I do a query, if I get on their models v1, we can see all the different models that we can use. We're going to use the DeepSeek v3. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a bunch of them. This is what we're going to be using today, and specifically this model, which will give us the word limit and pricing and all that. So that's what we're going to be performing here today. So let's set this up. Actually, let's go to the prompt and then do a testing here. So if I go back to the prompt here, and then let's go to the documentation real quick. And you can see here that I can send this payload. Let's test this out. Just make sure it's working properly. So let's go back here. And then for the prompt completion, so this is coming from their documentation. I'm going to go and remove some properties, and I'm going to specify the model. So the model is going to be the DeepSeek v3. And then we're going to copy that, and we're going to go back here. And then we're going to replace the OpenAI. So right here. All right, I have to pass in my authorization, my API key. So now once I execute this, you can see here that I get the response, get the data, and then the completion, and then the model. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you see the message and the content. So that's what we want to retrieve when we use this API. So let's set up the Subflow in NNN. So I'm going ahead and add a new blank workflow in NNN. So this is going to be the setup for the Subflow that we're going to be using in the main flow. So the main objective here is to reach out to Straighco. We're going to be accepting the message on the Subflow, and then we're going to be passing that dynamic message into the HTTP request, and then we're going to be sending that response back into the receiving flow. So the way we would do that is we're going to execute a workflow, and we're going to be looking for the trigger when called by another workflow here. Right, so we're not going to be doing anything here. So the next step is we're going to be assuming that we're going to be sending in a message. So we're going to do an HTTP request. And then we're going to be performing the same action that we did in the Postman. So if we go back into the documentation, let's copy the curl request sample, and let's go back into NNN. So we can import the curl when we do we can do an import curl command here. For some reason, it doesn't work when I do an import including the data, but if you remove the data, it will properly import it, except for the method. It's not properly importing for some reason. But we were able to import, and then the post method is what we're going to be using. We're not going to be sending the headers. The only thing that we're going to be sending here is the authentication. We're going to be setting up generic credential type, and then we're going to be picking the header auth. I have set up a bunch of header auth here already. So if you've never set up a header authentication before, it's just a matter of setting up the header and the key value pair. The way to do that is you need to create a new credential. And here is where the authorization goes. The value is where the bearer API key goes. So you just need to put your API key and then rename this to something identifiable. Now you have the auth account set up. Let's close this out since I already have my header auth. For the body, instead of defining our body below, we're going to define using JSON. Let's go back into Postman. We're just going to copy the payload, paste the JSON. So all the parameters, all the models that we need to get is already here. We just need to test that, make sure that it's working and it's giving us the result that we want. So we should get back the same result that we previously had inside of Postman. So once we got the result, we're going to get the same payload that we get back before. We got the data, we got the DeepSeek, and then underneath that, we got the message and the content. So now we need to drill down to the content and then send this back into the calling Subflow or calling flow. So we're going to change the message to make it dynamic, so it's coming from the previous node. So the way to do that is we're going to replace the message, and we're going to switch to expression, and we're going to do a $JSON and .message. So this is going to be looking into the previous node, and we're going to be capturing the message argument, and then we're going to be replacing any line breaks into an empty string. And that's what we're going to be passing in as part of the message here, right? So once we do that, we're going to rename this to a Straighco API request. Once that's completed, we're going to set the fields. So the last node as part of the Subflow is the one that's going to be sent back into the main flow. So let's do an edit field here to clean things up so that we don't send unnecessary properties and data to the calling flow. So let's just replace this with a response, and then we can just drag the response, which is the content, right? So let's drag it in. And then once we do that, this is what the main flow is going to see once we execute the Subflow. So once the Subflow has been established, we can go back into the main flow, and we're going to prepare the message. So the Subflow is expecting an argument of message. That means we need to pass in the message. So we're going to do an edit field here. And then we're going to be setting the message. We're going to click on this and setting the name to message so we can properly hand off the message for the Subflow. For the message, we're going to switch to an expression since we want to include additional variables here coming from the webhook. So we're going to go back here, and we're going to see here that I'm going to go and expand this. Please classify the post into one of those 4 categories: help, announcement, information, or spam. Consider the post as spam if it doesn't provide any value or the person is selling something. Respond with only one category. The word response will be in lowercase, and then we're passing in the post, and then we're going to be passing in the webhook. Then within the body, we're going to be passing in the body of the post, and then we're going to be replacing any line breaks with an empty string, just to catch those characters that are going to be messing up the JSON payload that we're going to be sending into the subflow. So we're going to rename this. We're going to go and call this prepare LLM message. All right, so we're going to test step. And then after this, we're gonna actually, let's make this go up on the chain. I'm going to change this again. Do a test step here, and I'm going to pin the data just to make sure it doesn't mess us up again. And let's execute the next one. Now it's going to go up here. Now we can do a test again. So now the message is going to be this for the output, and then now we can call the subflow now. So we can execute workflow, and then we can call another workflow here. So now from here, we're going to do the source of the database, and from the list, we can filter this down, and we can do a demo Straiko subflow, which we just created. And then we're just going to run it with all items. And I'm going to test this step. All right, so once we execute this and do a test, the response here is help, which is coming back from the subflow, which is from Straiko's API. Let's rename this to classify FB posts. And then let's close this out. So the next step is we're going to clean up the post. The way to do that is we're going to set up another edit fields here. So similar to what we did before, let's just duplicate this one, and we're going to attach it. All right, let's edit that edit message, and then we're going to provide this prompt. I'm going to expand it. So please act as a communication specialist and clarify the following Facebook group posts to extract the name of the poster and the main question being asked. The output will be in Markdown format, but don't include extra code syntax in the output. Do not include additional commentary. And then we're going to be providing the poster, which is the name of the person coming from the webhook. So inside the body is the poster, and then the post would be the post. So we're going to see here the preview on the right-hand side, what the output is going to look like. So let's close this out. And then we're going to do a test step here. And then you can see that the message that's coming back is the prompt that we just provided, right? So the next step is we're going to do the same as previously. We're going to duplicate this, and we're going to be calling that subflow again. So we're going to go and clean up the message. So this is going to be the cleanup prompt that we're providing here. It's going to be using the same subflow that we did before, and then it's going to be using the previous node, which contains the prompt that we want, which is to clean up the post. Let's run this. All right, so the response here, you can see that the response, it will give you the poster and then the main questions in a Markdown format. So later on, before we send this to our email, we're going to convert this to HTML so that it doesn't have that Markdown characters when we send ourselves an email. So that's done. We're going to pin this one for now. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to summarize the content so we can use that as a subject for our email, so that we don't have to open up the email just to see what the post is about. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go and duplicate this, and we're going to go and attach it to the previous node. All right, for the message, we're going to swap this out into another prompt. So please act as a communication specialist and turn the following Facebook group post into a clear one-sentence summary with 10 words or less that will be used as a subject of an email. Do not include additional commentary. Just send back the response that is ready to be used as an email subject. In addition, don't include the word subject. So sometimes it would add or include the word subject, so I don't want that to be included. And then we're specifying the post again, which is where we're going to be using the webhook, and then the body, and then we're going to be using the post. So you have to make sure that the name of the webhook is spelled out correctly. Otherwise, it's not going to point to the correct node. So get the result on the right hand side, and we're going to rename this into summary, right? So let's close this out, and then we're going to duplicate the previous node for calling the subflow, and we're going to connect it. And then we're going to rename this. I have to rename the nodes to make sure that it captures what it's doing. So we have the classify post here, and then I have the cleanup post, and then the summarize post for the email subject. So we're going to run this, and then this is what the output looks like. So handling if node for the search results in monday.com workflow. That's going to be the summary and what we're going to be using in the subject line. So then the last thing that we need to do here before we do a notification for our email is to set up and insert the data inside of Google Sheet. So we need to make sure that we specify the columns correctly in this next step. So we're going to add the edit field here. And we're going to do a manual mapping, and we're going to be specifying the fields that we want to use and insert into Google Sheets. So we're going to insert the ID. We're going to go and insert the poster and the post. And then we're going to do the clean post, date added. And then classification and the group. And then we're going to rename this node into set Google Sheet fields. And then we're going to store the ID here. So we're going to switch to expression and scroll down to the bottom. And we're just going to drag the post as an ID. And we're going to do a substring here. And then we're going to convert it to lowercase. So that's going to be the ID. And then for the poster, we're going to grab it from the webhook as well. We're going to drag the poster. And then for the post, we're going to grab the original content of the post. And then for the clean post, we're going to be using the output from LLMs when we clean up the post. We're going to drag the response. And then for the date added, we're going to switch to an expression. We're going to use the $.now to perform this action. We're going to go and .now, and then we're going to do a format, and we're going to be using the switch to this format. We're going to see the month and then day and then the year. So that's going to be for the date added. And then for the classification, we're going to be using the response from classify a FB post. We're just going to drag it. And then for the group, that's going to be coming from the webhooks post. Right, so once we got that, we're going to test the step right here, just to set up as part of the output. And then the last thing that we need to do here is we need to insert into Google Sheets. So we're going to look for the sheets, and then we're going to append row in sheet. And we're just going to rename this to add to Google Sheets. So the credentials have been established from previous nodes already, so we don't have to worry about the credentials. So we just have to pick the correct credentials here. And then the operation is going to be the append row. And then we're going to be choosing the Facebook group post, which is the document. And then we're going to be choosing the sheet one. So instead of mapping the different columns, we're just going to send the previous node, which is already mapped to the columns for this Google Sheet. So we're going to do a map automatically instead, which will grab the previous node instead. So if we go back into Google Sheet, let's remove all the posts, and we're just going to go and delete all the rows so we can see it. So now I can do a test step. Everything's good to go. We're going to go back here. Now I got the ID post, the poster, the post, and then the cleaned up post, the date added, and the help, and the name of the group. So now we've successfully inserted a new row in Google Sheet for the new post. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to classify the document, make sure that it fits within this help instead of the information or other type of classification. And let's go into the flow here and continue. So instead of doing an if node, you can easily do an if node here and say, if this category contains help, then we can go and send us an email. For flexibility, we're going to use switch instead. That will allow us to take action based on different categories. So if it's an announcement, send us a different notification, maybe send us a different type of message, maybe. So we're going to do a switch instead, and we're going to be setting up the routing rules. So we're going to switch to an expression here. All right, for the expression, we're going to drag up the classify FB post response. And then we're going to, since it's a string, we want to do a contains. If it does contain the word help, we're going to perform a action of sending us an email. So we're going to go and rename the output. And then we're going to go and do a switch here. So if we add a different routing rule, which we're going to be performing a similar action where we're going to, let's switch this to announcement, for instance. And we're going to go and switch this to contains, and we do a test step. So you can see here the different output. It was able to do an output for the help. And if I do a switch, I change the output name and do a test step again, you can see that the help is going to be part of the condition is going to be executed, right? So now we want to handle anything that has to do with help. So let's convert to Markdown to HTML so that we can send ourselves an email notification. Let's continue on the help condition side of the equation by creating and adding a Markdown here. So let's switch this to Markdown to HTML. That's going to be the mode that we're going to be picking. And then for the Markdown, we're going to be picking the result from the cleanup post. We're going to drag it here to the Markdown. And then for the destination, by default, it's going to be the key or the property that's going to be set to is going to be the data. Let's change this to HTML since that seems to be more appropriate. Let's do a test tab here. And then for the output, you can see that the clean post is going to be output, and then the HTML, which is what we can use for the HTML body of the message. As far as the email is concerned, we can add a Gmail here. That would be the easiest path to sending us an email. So we can send ourselves an email. But instead of using Gmail, we're going to use a different service. So I had this service for a while. It's called Email It, which is an email API for developers, which will allow you to send an email in mass using SMTP or using their API. So it's very similar to SendGrid in that regard. So what's nice is that you can see all the outbound email, and then you can see the HTML, what's been sent, and also where it's coming from, where it's sent to, and including the subject. So you have a trail of emails that you can keep track of, and it's nice just to do something different. So let's use their API. So I'm going to switch back to Postman. I already have an Email It set up, which you can see here. The way we can use our API is to do a post request onto this URL. And then for the authorization, you need to set up the authorization. Similar to Strayco, where you can pass in via the headers, via the authorization, and then bear, and then the API key. And then for the body, it's going to accept the from, to, subject, who to reply to, and the actual HTML. So we're going to set this up using this approach. So we're going to go and switch back to NNN and add a last node where we're going to be using an HTTP request. And then for this one, we're going to be changing this to send an email. And then we're going to be switching to a post. And then we're going to be pasting in the URL for the Email It service. And then for the authentication, we're going to change this to a generic credential type. And then we're going to switch to header auth. And then instead of the Strayco, we're going to switch to my Email It header auth account, which is very similar to what we did previously. We're just going to add a authorization here, and then the bearer and space, and then the authorization API key. We're not going to pass in a query parameters. We're not going to be passing in the headers, but we're going to be passing in a body, which we're not going to be defining below. We're going to be using a JSON instead. So if I go back to Postman, I can just copy this whole thing. So this is going to be the sample payload that we're going to be using, but we have to switch to expression to make it dynamic, since the body of this is going to be coming from the automation. It's not going to be static. I'm actually going to go replace this with what we need to use. So I'm going to explain what the JSON body payload looks like. So we're going to be defining the static from where it's coming from, and then who is going to be sending it to. And then the subject, we're going to be including the group name, and then column, and then we're going to be including the summary of the post response, and then we're going to be replacing any line breaks into an empty space, and then we're going to be replacing any double quotes with a single quote so that it doesn't mess up with the JSON payload that we have here. That's going to be for the subject. So if you go back into my email, so that's what you have the group, and then you have the summary, and then the next line would be the reply to, who to reply to, which is not really important in this case. But the most important thing here is the HTML body. So we have to specify a property of HTML, and then the JSON HTML is going to be coming from the previous node, which we ran earlier when we converted the Markdown to HTML. So we're doing a $.JSON here, and then the HTML will be the output. And then with this one, we're just going to go and replace any line breaks similar to the previous property. And then we're going to replace the double quotes into a single quote. And that's going to be the HTML. And then we can do a test on this, make sure everything is working. All right, so you can see here that the new email came through. We were able to get notified via an email of the new post. You can see here that the poster, and there's a main question, and then the name of the group. So that's essentially what we sent via the notification of email. To finish off this whole automation, we're just gonna have to make sure that we do a save here, and then we activate that flow. And then we have to go back into Zero Work, and then we have to make sure that we set up the schedule. So we go back to Zero Work here and click on the schedule. And then now we can change the schedule to whenever we want to do the automation, right? So we're going to do in changes to run every day. And then we're going to change this to interval. And then for the units, we're going to change it to the minutes. And then the lowest interval that we can pick in Zero Work is 5 minutes. So that's what we're going to be using here. And then we're going to be setting the time zone. So once we do that, we can just hit schedule here, and then that everything should work. And on the end side, everything should be activated. So there you go. I hope that you find this video insightful and informative. And as always, if you have any questions on anything that I've talked about today, please feel free to leave it down in the comments, and I will see you guys on the next video.